You want to sell, but your place is rented. So now you're stuck asking, should I wait for the lease to end or sell with a tenant in place? Here's the truth most sellers don't hear in time. Selling a tenanted property in Quebec isn't impossible, but it's a very different from a vacant or owner-occupied sale. And if you get it wrong, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars or kill your deal at the notary. Hi, I'm Aguinaga, your Montreal real estate broker and investor. I've helped dozens of owners sell properties with tenants in place, from small condos to full plexes, and I've also been on the buying side when those deals fall apart. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the real pros and cons of selling with tenants, how it affects your price, what Quebec law allows, and how to protect your sale from surprise delays, financing rejections, or tenant disputes. Yes, in Quebec, you can sell a property that's tenant occupied, but the buyer inherits the lease. That means the lease survives the sale, the rent remains the same, the buyer cannot just move in unless the conditions for repossession are met under the Quebec Civil Code. So, unless you're an owner-occupant repossessing for yourself or a family member, and you follow the legal 6 months notice window before the lease renews, you cannot force the tenant to leave. And if you try to agree privately to a move out without documenting it properly, it could blow up at the notary. So let's be clear, selling with tenants is legal, but it's not flexible. Here's where most sellers get surprised. When you sell with tenants in place, you lose the owner-occupant buyer pool. They can't move in, so they move on. That leaves only investors. Investors will underwrite your property like a business. They look at cap rate, net income, deferred maintenance, lease strength, and financing options. If your rents are below market, your price will take a hit because the buyer is buying the income, not the potential. Let's look at an example. If your property is worth $750,000 on the open market, vacant, but only brings in $26,000 a year in rent, at a 4% cap rate, that investor is offering closer to $650,000. And if your tenant has poor payment history or restricts access for showings, expect less interest and more negotiation. Selling a tenanted unit is a logistics game. You must give 24-hour notice for visits. Visits must be between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And tenants can refuse certain times, especially if they're shift workers, have kids, or just aren't thrilled about the sale. You can't force access for staging or cleaning, and if the place is messy, dark, or smells like smoke, that's your showing experience. As a seller, this means you could be looking at fewer showings, less control over presentation, and more price resistance from buyers who can't picture the potential. Selling with tenants in place also opens the door to a few serious legal and timing risks that too many owners overlook and you should be prepared for. First, your lease documentation needs to be airtight. If there's any missing information, like unclear rent amounts, unpaid deposits, or vague lease terms, your buyer's lender could reject the file, and that financing falls apart. Another common issue is confusion around repossession. A lot of buyers don't understand that they have to give their notice 6 months prior to the lease end. So if we're not in the fall market realistically, the timing is not going to work out for them to be able to repossess for the following July, and that could kill your deal. And last but not least, there are tenant-related red flags. If there's a history of rent issues, damage, or ongoing noise complaints, you're legally required to disclose those, especially if they could affect the property's value. One more piece that trips sellers up is access. You need to plan in advance for inspectors and appraisers because their schedules are tight and tenants aren't always flexible. If you don't coordinate all this early, the sale can drag or even die before you ever get to closing. In other words, this is not a casual sale. It needs a good real estate team by your side and real prep. Now, there are moments when this approach works. Here's when it's worth listing with tenants in place. If you have market rate rents, clean leases, and a cooperative tenant. If the unit is part of a larger income property where buyers are all investors. If the buyer is another landlord looking for stable income, not personal use. If you're open to pricing it at a cap rate value, not owner-occupant emotional value. Also, if your tenant is open to negotiating a move out with proper compensation and legal agreement, we can sometimes coordinate a vacant possession strategy with buyer interest. But don't rely on that without confirmation. When we list a tenanted property, we do the following before hitting the market. Verify lease validity and rent payments. Collect all required documents, lease renewals, letters, deposits. Document showing availability with the tenant. Review any noise, damage, or payment issues. Write the listing copy honestly, but strategically for the right buyer and audience. And we coordinate buyer questions with answers backed by law, not just opinion. We also model the sale with and without a tenant so that you can decide if it's worth waiting to sell vacant or pricing smart now. Selling with a tenant in place can work, but it's not the same as clean vacant listing. If you understand the realities, plan your strategy, and price based on income, not emotion, you can still get a clean transaction and close on time. But If you skip the prep, you risk buyer drop-off, delayed closings, or worse, a broken deal at the notary. If you're thinking about selling a tenanted property, book a 15-minute seller strategy call. We can team up and evaluate your lease situation, model both sale paths with and without tenants, and give you a legal and pricing roadmap so you don't step on landmines. This could literally change your deal. If this gives you clarity, hit the like button and subscribe. I drop weekly insights for real buyers, sellers, and investors working in real Montreal conditions. Once again, I'm LJ Aguinaga, your Montreal real estate broker. Thanks for watching, and when you're ready to sell, we'll get it done right.